Hello again, YouTube. Not quite the same day I wanted, but 2 weeks in a row, I'm off to a roll. This is the closest thing I've gotten to a roll for a while. This time I'd like to talk about something else, Castlevania. I just got through seeing the 4-episode Netflix series. They got more episodes on the way, and I am really happy for that. This is something that needed to be made. Konami does not care about Castlevania and hasn't for quite some time. Now, just to get this out of the way, I came into Castlevania as a game franchise kind of late. My first game was, I believe, Circle of the Moon for the Game Boy Advance. Not the best way to come into the series, but certainly not the worst. Castlevania as a game franchise also unfortunately fell victim to the, I guess you would say, the mainstream infection, where over time something loses what made it special, what separated it, what made it stand out, and just starts becoming formulaic and the same kind of thing that you would see from everybody else. When it happened to Resident Evil, it was mildly annoying, but Castlevania was actually saddening for me to see that happen. And since then, Konami hasn't... They ended it in a really weird way, and I don't know if they plan on continuing it. There was a DS game where they came up with some stupid explanation for how Dracula reincarnates. They wasted an entire game and all of its story explaining why Dracula looks different in every game, but that's a whole other point. The anime, only 4 episodes long, and they don't waste any time setting things up. You get an idea of what's going on in the very first episode. These are only between 20 and 30-minute episodes, so you can catch up on this in a single night. It tells the story of Trevor Belmont in Castlevania 3, and they do a pretty good job of it. This would be, in terms of the franchise's lore, the first Belmont to go up against Dracula, period. So he was the first one to fight Dracula toe-to-toe. The show spends the first, maybe 10, probably 15 minutes setting up why Dracula's doing what he's doing. And it's not that... I love that they didn't go with the killing joke logic. I always hated that, and it was unfortunately very common, especially in Japanese-made stories. The idea of somebody who had everything going for them, had a pretty decent life, and then one bad day and they become a genocidal lunatic. It seems so out of place when Sonic Adventure 2 did it. Don't lie, that's Shadow's entire backstory. Everything was great, Gun shows up, kills his family, suddenly he wants to murder everyone on the planet. That's the entire story, that's his entire arc in the second Sonic Adventure game. Here, Dracula is... He hates humankind, and we learn this all in like the first few minutes. He hates humankind and he's withdrawn. He's not engaging with them, he's staying far away, he's got his own castle, he surrounds his castle with the fields of impaled bodies, sort of as a warning sign to keep intruders out. But he's withdrawn. He's not actively killing anybody, he even says he hasn't done that in a very long time. He's perfectly fine living as a hermit, living on his own, staying far away from people. Let them do their thing, I'm gonna do mine. He meets... Oh, this is gonna annoy me. I already can't remember her name. I should have written this down. This is infuriating now. It's gonna bug me. I have to rewatch it again. For a third time, just for the hell of it. A human woman comes to his castle. Lisa, I think is her name. And she wants to learn science. And she wants to engage with him. She wants him to teach her science, technology, deductive reasoning, medicine. She wants to go out and help people. And she talks Dracula into, over time, going out and walking the earth as a human and seeing the world the way humans see it. Not traveling around in his castle, appearing and disappearing, or moving from point A to point B, but actually walking on foot. Skip ahead to the present day, the time of the actual story. The church has decided she's a witch, and she's going to be burned as a witch. This doesn't explain Dracula in that usual killing joke way. It's not that he hates humans and their activities convinced him to do this, although they technically do. She convinced him to try and bridge the gap. She was part of the reason why he could see the world and wouldn't engage in slaughter. But then this happens. Wife is burned at the stake. Now he's been convinced. They need to die. Humans need to go. The land of Wallachia must be purged. Something happened well in advance that made him disgusted with humans, made him withdraw, and made him isolate himself. So it's not that he had everything. It's that he had what he wanted after all of that stuff had happened. I'm kind of stumbling over myself here, but I think you get my idea. So of course, Dracula pops out. He shows up in the most nightmarish way, and I love this. It's great that they show the quote-unquote good guys as being disgusting people, the most deplorable human beings that you can imagine. They hate absolutely everybody. They are afraid of what they don't understand, and most importantly, despite being in proximity, we'll just shout them down. We'll just scream at them, or in this case, burn them. Dracula emerges from the fire of his wife's, I didn't want to say pyre because that would rhyme, but yeah, funeral pyre. The stake on which she's being burned. His face emerges, makes the declaration, you got 1 year. Story kicks up 1 year later. Like, this is where the primary story happens. They've had their 1 year to leave, they haven't, and he summons an army of demons. He clearly has a lot of pull in hell. What follows, it's both a great story and entertaining action. There's not a lot in the way of horror, although there are gore moments and very scary parts. My favorite. Don't know if I want to spoil this one too much, because this is definitely one I'm going to encourage you to see on your own. Be advised, there's a lot of blood and gore. There's tons of it. And it seems like it's appropriate for what Castlevania is, but it's annoying that it never showed up in the games. Yeah, there was a little bit of that in Symphony of the Night, but not to this extent. Not to the extent of something that you would see where there's a big, badass vampire slaughtering people, or even just lording over his castle, and he's got all these abominations and horrors standing between you and him. This is what you've expected to see. You don't need to know anything about the games in order to really appreciate the Netflix series, and that is a huge point in its favor. If you know anything about the game series, you'll catch the references, but it's not necessary. You'll see things like the sub-weapons, the dagger, the axe, the holy water. Those will all show up and it'll be perfectly fine. If you don't know the significance of them in the game, again, it's not going to take away from the action sequences. There are great back alley fights. If you see it, there's going to be an eyeball. Won't spoil it. See it on your own. This has actually become an in-joke with my friends and I who've all seen it. The eyeball scene. You'll know it when you see it, and if you've already seen it, you know what I'm talking about. All of the fight sequences, I believe they're all boss fights out of the games. They are structured in a quasi-realistic way, or as realistic as acrobatics and whip techniques can be. The fight between two particular characters that they actually are kind of building up from the very beginning, so it's not like it's a surprise. Alucard and Trevor. Trevor Belmont is a down-and-out, not down-and-out, that's not the right way to put it. He's a member of the Belmont family, and the Belmont family here has been disgraced. They've been found studying black magic. Well, if you're going to hunt black magic, you got to know something about it. So basically, they were caught being effective hunters. That's it. The fear of the people led them to believe the Belmont family were evil and that they were engaging in the very monsters that they were fighting. That's more or less what you're going to see a lot. And I think it's shockingly accurate with how people tend to behave, especially in large groups. There's Sypha, Alucard. They have yet to introduce Grant. I'm waiting on that because I think they could get real creative with this. You see everyone as a character with a three-dimensional personality. Even the most despicable human beings that you see there still have other sides. And while you're only really seeing one side, you can see the hints of another. Very beginning of the series. Right after we see Trevor for the first time, right after Dracula comes back, there's a full-on argument between two drunk guys at a bar over whether or not one of them was right to hit somebody who is having sex with his goat in the face with a shovel. This is totally accurate. The scene goes exactly that way. Well, it starts there, it goes somewhere more interesting from there. Yes, more interesting than goat sex. And you see, they are drunk. They're very drunk. They're thoroughly inebriated. But the intensity in which they're talking about this whole thing, whether or not the first person was right to hit the other guy in the face with a shovel. This is the kind of small-town troubles you tend to have. Especially in the, what was it, 16th century, 17th century? I forget. But even them, even they, you get the idea that something is going on in their life outside of what you see in the bar. All the religious clergymen, the priesthood, they believe what they are doing is good. They're not doing this to be mustache-twirling villains. They honestly think theirs is the one true path, theirs is the word, theirs is the truth, and anyone who questions it or does anything that is not prescribed by their path is therefore evil. Yeah, I see you down there. You want food? Cat. And they will burn anyone or kill anyone or execute anyone who would say otherwise, which has put several groups in that gray area. And the person who is now in charge of the church is starting to push that even the gray area must be purged. But all of this is exactly what caused Dracula to start going on his rampage in the first place. So you can see where they're coming from, which is a desire to help people, but their method is born out of ignorance. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, after all. Even the heroes, you see that they are flawed. They are troubled. They don't exactly know what their next step should be all of the time. And Trevor, when he first shows up, he's an alcoholic. He's what's the word I'm looking for? He's not quite depressed, apathetic, cynical. He doesn't want to care, but he kind of knows he should. And it's after several fights and a few heart-to-heart talks and experiences that he starts stepping up. You see this happening a mile away. You see that's going to be his character arc for this first four-parter. Actually, on its own, these first 4 episodes are a pretty solid story. I don't want to go into too much more detail because I would start going into hard spoiler territory. This is the intro of Castlevania, at least Castlevania 3. This is something that you should see. I'm going to strongly encourage you to. If you've played the games, if you love the games, this will be great. If you haven't and you're okay with blood, gore, and some extremely foul language, this is right up your alley. Even just the fight sequences. The fight sequences alone are worth it. The dialogue. I'll go into the dialogue, okay. The characters, though it looks like it's Japanese anime, I don't think it was animated with the Japanese language in mind. The lips certainly sync up very well with the English voice lines. There's no... I can only really say there's no attempts to fill in the empty spaces. You've probably seen these before where there's an anime going and the dubbed language, usually English in this case, especially noticeable in the English language versions, the English language version will end up with a shorter line than the Japanese version. So they'll end up drawing out certain words, saying them in weird ways, or having a weird pause in the middle of a sentence. Not quite what I've been doing, but you kind of see where it happens. Naruto was especially known for it. especially saying the term believe it, or the phrase believe it constantly. You don't see that here. Everything that somebody says is an organic line. You see a real person saying that in the situation, or a real topic, or a conversation. The barroom fight, where we first meet Trevor, he is getting the shit kicked out of him by some drunkards. He is also drunk, so he kind of doesn't have an excuse. Well, kind of does, but sort of doesn't. He keeps taking repeated shots to the groin, and he brings this up. He says, straight up, "Can we please leave my testicles out of this?" I don't know how you can make a shot to the nuts more intelligent than that. The dialogue, other places, I'm not going to spoil any of this, any of these bits. It's better that you see this and not know some of these jokes are coming. I've got really nothing else to say, just the Castlevania anime was a great decision. Whoever greenlit it was really smart. They knew what they were talking about. The people who are working on it know exactly what they're doing. I have faith that the same team is going to be making the rest of the series, and I'm really hoping that they do. We should have nothing to worry about, and you should have everything to enjoy. I'm the Camper, and I'll see you next week, hopefully.